Donald Trump must have breathed a sigh of relief as 1995 drew to a close. The epic crash of New York City, NYC, real estate, which had battered Trump's investments and left many of his fellow real estate investors clinging to any lifeline of solvency, was finally over. Prices of New York City real estate, which had fallen in each of the previous 5 years, had finally started to rise. Apartment rental prices fell by 15% during the slump that had begun in 1988. The prices of co-ops and condos were down by nearly twice that much. Manhattan homes fell by 32.9% between 1989 and 1996, according to a study by the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy. In Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, that West Side stretch where Trump had invested so much in a plan to turn an old rail yard into a new neighborhood, home prices fell 40.4%. The giant Canadian real estate company Olympia & York had declared bankruptcy. At one point, it had been the largest landlord in New York. By 1992, it had fired its bankers from J.P. Morgan and hired Felix G. Rohatyn, the guy who had saved New York City itself from the brink of bankruptcy in the 1970s. In the end, it would be swallowed up by its creditors, vanishing into the ash heap of history. Banks were getting crushed. New Jersey's largest savings association was seized by federal regulators after real estate losses. Wall Street was scrambling, with real estate king Goldman Sachs suddenly finding it could not raise money from investors for real estate projects. Even Goldman, which has dominated the business on Wall Street, is telling many of its real estate bankers to look for new jobs, a news story noted in 1991. Trump had made it through the worst period in New York City real estate in living memory while bigger, deeper-pocketed rivals had failed, a sigh of relief, at least. Yet according to the New York Times story detailing glimpses at Trump's finances from tax transcripts of his filings from 1985 to 1994, Trump's personal financial losses during the New York City real estate crisis somehow mark him as a failure rather than someone who persevered through an economic story. From the Times. Mr. Trump was propelled to the presidency, in part, by a self-spun narrative of business success and of setbacks triumphantly overcome. He has attributed his first run of reversals and bankruptcies to the recession that took hold in 1990. But 10 years of tax information obtained by the New York Times paints a different, and far bleaker, picture of his deal-making abilities and financial condition. The story goes on to describe how Trump reported negative income, meaning he lost money, every year from 1985 until 1994, the years for which the Times obtained tax transcripts. The big losses, however, come the years from 1990 through 1994, with 1990 and 1991 showing up as the worst. In other words, the Times story shows that Trump's business of real estate investing in and around New York City suffered massive losses in the years when New York City real estate crashed. The Times story on Trump's taxes does not include the condition of the New York City real estate market in those years, although every link to data in this article, saving the Furman Center study, is to articles in the New York Times. This is not the first time the Times has declared Trump a business failure. In 1991, when the losses the New York Times reported on This Week were amounting, Times columnist Floyd Norris declared that Trump's financial troubles meant the Trump era will never be the same. For Mr. Trump, Fed easing might not help that much. Bankers may not be fast learners, but they do catch on. For him, the era of easy credit is unlikely to ever return, Norris wrote in 1990. As it turns out, that announcement of the financial death of Trump was as exaggerated as claims made decades later that Trump could not possibly win the 2016 presidential election. The New York Times has published the personal tax data of President Donald Trump spanning a decade's worth of time from long before he was a candidate for president, saying the documents show that Trump lost more than $1 billion in the timeframe of 1985 to 1994. While not actual tax returns, the Times says the data includes never-before public information from the tax returns obtained from tax transcripts that glean data from the 1,040 forms Trump filed with the IRS. Times reporters Russ Buettner and Suzanne Craig wrote in the piece published Tuesday evening, by the time his Master of the Universe memoir Trump, The Art of the Deal hit bookstores in 1987, Donald J. Trump was already in deep financial distress, losing tens of millions of dollars on troubled business deals, according to previously unrevealed figures from his federal income tax returns. Mr. Trump was propelled to the presidency, in part, by a self-spun narrative of business success and of setbacks triumphantly overcome. He has attributed his first run of reversals and bankruptcies to the recession that took hold in 1990. But 10 years of tax information obtained by the New York Times paints a different, and far bleaker, picture of his deal-making abilities and financial condition. The data, printouts from Mr. Trump's official Internal Revenue Service tax transcripts, with the figures from his federal tax form, the 1040, for the years 1985 to 1994, represents the fullest and most detailed look to date at the president's taxes, information he has kept from public view. Though the information does not cover the tax years at the center of an escalating battle between the Trump administration and Congress, it traces the most tumultuous chapter in a long business career, an era of fevered acquisition and spectacular collapse. The lengthy Times piece goes on to explain how these documents show Trump, over that decade, reported losses totaling $1.17 billion in just 10 years. Buettner and Craig wrote. The numbers show that in 1985, Mr. Trump reported losses of $46.1 million from his core businesses, largely casinos, hotels and retail space in apartment buildings. They continued to lose money every year, totaling $1.17 billion in losses for the decade. In fact, year after year, Mr. Trump appears to have lost more money than nearly any other individual American taxpayer, the Times found when it compared his results with detailed information the IRS compiles on an annual sampling of high-income earners. His core business losses in 1990 and 1991, more than $250 million each year, were more than double those of the nearest taxpayers in the IRS information for those years. Overall, Mr. Trump lost so much money that he was able to avoid paying income taxes for 8 of the 10 years. It is not known whether the IRS later required changes after audits. In response to the Times investigation, Trump critics in the media and Democrat Party piled on quickly with criticisms of the president. On Tuesday's broadcast of MSNBC's Hardball, host Chris Matthews stated that if President Trump's tax returns had been publicly known, he wouldn't have won the 2016 election. Matthews said, he wouldn't have won. That's the catch-22. If the American people found out the guy's prancing around with the airplanes and skyscrapers, and he owns everything in the world, golf courses all over the world, and he doesn't pay any taxes, they'd say, that's not fair. You can't be our leader. I think even the people in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan would say, at the margin, he's not my guy. My people pay taxes. Red counties that voted for GOP President Donald Trump are booming more economically under his presidency than blue counties that voted for his Democrat opponent, former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, a new report from the liberal Brookings Institution shows. Brookings' Mark Morrow and Jason Whitten wrote on Tuesday. As the 2020 conversations ramp up, the red and blue economic growth patterns in the U.S. continue to be an enormous focal point. Now, as new data comes out on the years 2017 to 2018 and the president crows, it's clear that counties that voted for President Trump have been winning a little, or at least winning a little more than they were. Specifically, the geography of growth has changed somewhat, at least for the moment. Counties that voted for Donald Trump are seeing a bit faster employment growth than they were in the Obama years and are now adding jobs a little faster than are counties that voted for Hillary Clinton. These red counties that voted for Trump over Clinton delivered him 306 electoral votes and victories in 30.5 states, while Clinton won the popular vote but failed to win even 20 states, finishing with just 19.5 states plus the District of Columbia and just 227 electoral votes. The bet on Trump seems to be paying off, as under the Trump administration these counties are outpacing the blue Clinton counties in growth trajectory. Morrow and Whitten wrote. From 2010 to 2017, counties that voted for Clinton added jobs at a rate of 1.7% annually, compared to the 1.5% growth rate in Trump voting areas. But in 2017 and 2018, the pattern looks different. From January 2017 to September 2018, both Clinton and Trump counties saw an uptick in job creation. However, the increase was significantly larger in Trump counties where the annualized rate of growth increased from 1.5% to 2.6% a year. In other words, Morrow and Whitten wrote, since the election in 2016, the counties that voted for Trump have seen significant turnaround even though the counties that voted for Clinton are still in total outperforming the Trump counties despite the rapid rate turnaround in the Trump counties over the past couple years. Morrow and Whitten wrote. Given that, the locus of growth really is a little different than it was in the lead up to the 2016 election. As before, the 490 counties that voted for Clinton continue to massively predominate in the sheer volume and productivity of their economic activity. Together they accounted for 2/3 of the nation's employment growth and 3/4 of its GDP growth. But during the first 21 months of the Trump administration, as people and jobs once again begin to spread out and sprawl, job growth rates in the 2,622 Trump voting counties have gone from lagging behind those in Clinton counties to outpacing them. Redder, smaller, more exurban, and rural counties really are winning a little more, at least for now. Morrow and Wyndon later in their piece note that while Trump may engage in excessive crowing to brag about these Trump County successes, they argue his policies had not much to do with the Middle America comeback. What's going on here? They wrote. It's pretty clear that the modest, probably temporary, gains of red counties likely have little to do with Trump-era policies and much to do with familiar cyclical and sectoral economic patterns. While they claim that the Heartland's comeback does not have to do with Trump's policies, Trump would argue differently and has. Maybe the economy, Trump replied when Breitbart News asked him in a recent Oval Office interview what his biggest accomplishment was in his view. Look at jobs. Best jobs record in 60 years. Best individual records for Asians, for African Americans, for Hispanics ever. I think the economy, but I think a lot of things. Regulations, I think regulations led to the economy, the tax cuts. Even in the tax cuts we got ANWR. Nobody for 50 years could get it and I got it approved, the biggest drilling site. So we've done a good job, so in theory it's easier because I can say, look what I've done as opposed to the first time where I said, I can do this. When even the Brookings Institution, a left-of-center liberal think tank, is admitting that the economic data support a Middle America comeback under Trump, that is remarkable even though the group will not give Trump credit for it. But, generally speaking, the data that the Brookings Institution reports show an intense focus on that forgotten man that Trump talked about at his inauguration and that he has been focused on throughout his presidency. During his Tuesday speech to Nevada Democrats, Joe Biden acknowledged that there is a Second Amendment but said we need to deal with it rationally. Biden did not provide any clues of how to deal with it in his speech, but he highlighted the October 1, 2017, Las Vegas shooting and the December 14, 2012, Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Biden said, the fact is, it's hard to not think about October 1, that day. All the lives that were lost, all the families that were forever changed, all created by senseless gun violence. He talked about moments you never forget and said, I'll never forget the meeting I had with the parents of the 20 school kids that were killed and the teachers that were killed up in Sandy Hook. And it goes on and on and on. He added, and I just want to say to you, there's a Second Amendment, but there's a rational way to deal with the Second Amendment. Biden said, I just want to let you know that we can do it rationally. He never defined what doing it rationally means, nor did he discuss the fact that the Las Vegas shooter passed a background check for guns he used, while the Sandy Hook attacker stole his. Rather, Biden mentioned being rational and moved on.